So welcome to Morning Sit with Red Melissa, Spirit and Practice. And so this week we have been talking about spiritual partnership. And I so appreciate all of the responses, the DMs, the questions. Folks have been calling me, talking about their relationships and talking about what they're looking to call in for their next relationship, And so we're always preparing ourselves by doing our work. And that's why we do our spiritual practice. Doing our spiritual practice encourages us to continue to do our inner work so that when we're in relationship or we're calling forth relationships, we're magnetizing our minds to that relationship that we are desiring for our highest good at a high vibration, right? So keep doing your work. You're doing great. And so I just wanted to recap for everybody before we get into the conversation about disagreements and spiritual partnerships, right? So we said spiritual partnership is a partnership between equals. That's really important. Are you in a relationship with someone who is your equal? And let's just talk about equals in the sense of consciousness, in the sense of vibration. Do you vibrate at the same frequency? That's really important. So, spiritual partnership is a partnership between equals for the purpose of spiritual growth. So, that is the framework from which we're talking about spiritual partnerships. And we're talking about love relationships. So relationships with significant others. So spiritual partnerships can be in other relationships, but for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about love relationships with our significant others. So we talked about sacred relationships in our sacred series, right? And it's about reverence, right? We said sacredness is about reverence, holding something as holy. So in our spiritual partnerships, we're holding it with reverence, right? It's important. It's divine. It's delicious. And there's a commitment to growing and doing your work, right? We're making responsible choices in our relationship, and we're consciously choosing love. We're consciously choosing love. Even when we're frightened, we're choosing love to demonstrate and communicate with each other. We talked about having that conversation about what the intention of your relationship is. What is your intention? Because that's a lot of times we don't have that conversations and we just go by assumption. So I assume this and you assume that, and we are not on the same page. So have the conversation. What is your intention for the relationship? Because from that you create a dynamic connection with each other because you're headed in the same direction. You're on the same path together. And yesterday we talked about the feeling tone. What is the feeling tone of the relationship? Have that conversation. The feeling tone that I want to co-create with you in relationship is enthusiasm, is joy, is fun, is adventure, is peace, right? Have that conversation. What is the feeling tone? Because that feeling tone is the feeling tone that you are creating within yourself. You can't have the feeling tone in a relationship if you don't have it within yourself, right? So you're cultivating that within yourself, cultivating that in your relationship. Okay, so today we're talking about disagreements, right? And I'm talking about disagreements in the context of unity. So you can have disagreements and still be unified, right? We're not separate in our spiritual relationships. We recognize that we are living from the place of oneness, right? So there can be disagreement and still be oneness, right? So disagreements don't have to divide. You're not divided against each other. Okay, so there is unity and disagreements. So how do you resolve disagreements, right? Have that conversation before you're in a disagreement. right? You're talking about your feeling tone. You're talking about the intention of your relationship. Have a conversation about disagreements. Have a conversation about how you show up when you're in upset. When you're not upset. When you're not upset. So have that conversation. What works for you, what doesn't work for you when you're in disagreement with your spiritual partner. So I want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. It says, to agree with one another, so there may be no divisions among you, and that you may be perfectly united in mind and thought. So, perfectly united in mind and thought. So you could have disagreement and still be perfectly aligned, perfectly united in mind and thought, because you're leaning on the commitment to each other's spiritual growth. You're leaning on the commitment of the intention of your relationship. You're leaning in the commitment to co-create in your relationship. That does not go out the window just because you're in disagreement with one another, right? So in disagreement, there's an approach to learning and growing about yourself, about the other person, and about each other as spiritual partners. So the orientation in disagreement is not to defending my position, making the other person wrong, exerting inauthentic power. It's not about defending my perception or my perspective about something. It's not about proving a point. It's not about that, right? That's not the vibration that we are engaging in when we're in disagreement. We're engaging in learning about ourselves so that we can grow. And that person that we're in partnership is facilitating, standing with us because they're committed to our spiritual growth. Okay? So when you're in disagreement, right? You're in your feelings. Let's be real, right? We're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that human experience is feelings. So you are in your feelings. You are feeling a certain way. Own your feelings. That other person is not making you feel anything. They might have triggered a feeling within you, but they don't have the power to make you feel anything. When you say someone made me feel something, you're not taking 100% responsibility for your feelings. They may have triggered a feeling within you, right? Or they may be reflecting back to you a feeling, right? That needs to be resolved, that you need to take a closer look at, right? And that person is facilitating and supporting you in doing so. Now, sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're in the thick of it, right? You're not going to stop and say, oh, wait a minute, baby. Let me facilitate the opportunity for you to learn as you're upset with me right now, right? So sometimes we might have to take a moment and breathe. Take a sacred pause. Use some of our other tools, right? When we talk about communication, right? Because we had that conversation about how we communicate. What are our communication styles, right? Before we're in the thick of it, right? So we're feeling our feelings, we're owning our feelings 100%, and we're owning our perceptions about whatever it is that's going on. This is my reality about what's going on. That other person could have a totally different reality. And we're not making assumptions about it, right? And we're not taking anything personally. So utilizing the 4 agreements when you're in disagreement is perfect to practice. Practice the 4 agreements when you are in disagreement. Okay? Communicate your feelings in a loving and straightforward way. Communicate that within yourself and with your partner, right? Sometimes we're not clear in our communication, and a lot of reasons could do with not being clear within ourselves. So allow each other the space to get clear about what it is that we want to communicate, right? Okay. And I would say, debrief the disagreement. It's very powerful to debrief disagreements. You know, when you're at work and you're in a project, you've done a project, or you put on some event and you have that debriefing meeting to see and assess what worked, what didn't work, what we could do better. You could do that in spiritual partnership when you have a disagreement. After the disagreement and things have settled, right? And you're clear and you're in a space where you can assess and take a look back together, have a debrief. Debrief the disagreement, right? You check in and say, how are we doing? How are you doing, my beloved? How are you doing, my beloved? And share with each other. Assess if what you're doing worked. If it worked, wonderful. If it didn't work, what can we agree on to do differently the next time? Right? What would we do that might be more effective the next time? Debrief that with each other. And remember, it is not necessary to agree, right? It's not necessary to agree. The point of a disagreement, I call it a carefrontation, is not to come into agreement about whatever it is. It's to allow for that person to grow, to learn about themselves, to learn about each other in relationship. That is the intention. Because getting caught up in the, I want you to agree with me, is really about wanting that person to see from your perspective, right? And sometimes we get stuck there and we can't move things along. So get clear within yourself. Have the discussion before you're in the disagreement about how you're going to disagree. The method that you're going to use to resolve disagreements. How will you be with each other? And then debrief. Debrief the disagreement. Assess what worked, what didn't work. What did you learn about yourself? What is going to grow through this exchange of love? Because there's a commitment to the spiritual growth and spiritual partnership. So, I hope that's helpful. Please send me comments, DM me. I love the dialogue. I really do appreciate all the input. And I'm so happy to see so many of you today live. So today's t-shirt is Trust God, Do Good. Trust God, do good. And we could all incorporate that in our relationship, right? We're trusting God in our relationship and we're doing good with each other. So with that, peace and blessings. Have a wonderful day and enjoy.